Megan Lewis never planned to become a headline. Yet one stormy night, four strangers turned her quiet drive home into a deadly game of survival. The sky over Pine Hollow was bruised with clouds that evening, the last light of the day fading behind the dark tree line. The rain had started as a mist, but soon turned into a steady downpour, coating the narrow back roads with a slick layer of mud and water. Megan Lewis tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her wipers fighting to keep up as she made her way home after visiting her parents. It was supposed to be an ordinary Friday evening, a quiet drive through the countryside before a weekend of study and rest. But the moment she turned on an old creek road, everything began to feel wrong. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Her favorite radio station had gone static. Her phone showed no signal, and the woods on either side of the road seemed to press closer the deeper she went. It was a lonely stretch, just 30 miles of cracked asphalt that connected the highway to her small apartment in town. She had driven it dozens of times before, but tonight felt different. The air seemed heavier, colder, and every sound outside, the tapping rain, the creak of branches, echoed louder than it should have. When the headlights appeared in her rearview mirror, she thought nothing of it at first. Cars sometimes took this route to avoid the main road, especially truckers trying to save time. But the vehicle behind her wasn't keeping its distance. It followed closely, matching every turn she made. When she slowed down, it slowed too. When she accelerated, it did the same. The glowing beam stayed fixed on her car, too bright and too close, forcing her to squint. She told herself not to panic. Maybe it was just another driver in a hurry. Still, her pulse began to race. She tapped the brakes, hoping the driver would get the message. Instead, the headlights flashed once, then twice. A chill ran through her. She pressed her foot harder on the accelerator, tried to put some distance between them, but within seconds, the SUV was right behind her again. Her heart pounded as she turned onto an even smaller road leading through the pine woods. She knew there was a service station 5 miles ahead. If she could just make it there, she'd be safe. The rain thickened, and the sound of water hitting the windshield grew deafening. Suddenly, her car jolted. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died completely. The dashboard lights flickered out, leaving her in near darkness except for the relentless glow from behind. Megan tried to restart the car, but the ignition only clicked. Panic rose in her chest as she realized she was stranded, alone, in the middle of the woods, with no cell signal and a stranger's headlights bearing down on her. The SUV came to a slow stop behind her. The engine idled for a moment before cutting off. The rain eased into a whisper, but the silence that followed was worse than any noise. Through the rearview mirror, she saw the driver's door open. Then another. 4 doors in total. 4 silhouettes stepped out, slowly, deliberately, as if they had all the time in the world. They didn't rush or shout. They simply began walking toward her car. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel as she searched for something, anything, to protect herself with. She thought about honking, about running, but the car was dead, and her body felt frozen in place. The figures moved closer, rain glistening on their jackets under the faint light. One carried a flashlight, its beam cutting through the dark and stopping directly on her windshield. For a long second, they just stood there, watching her. Then one of them lifted something metallic from their side, a crowbar, she later remembered. That was when Megan realized this wasn't a coincidence. Her car hadn't simply broken down. Someone had made sure it would. The next thing Megan remembered was the sound of tires grinding over gravel and the faint, sickening sway of the vehicle as it moved deeper into the woods. Her wrists ached, bound tightly behind her with something rough and coarse, plastic ties that cut into her skin every time she shifted. The air inside the SUV was thick with the smell of wet clothing and gasoline. She could hear the low hum of the engine and the rain pounding on the roof, blending into a rhythm that made her stomach turn. No one spoke. The 4 figures sat in silence, their faces hidden in shadows, their movements calm and deliberate. After what felt like an eternity, the car came to a stop. Through the window, Megan saw only darkness. No lights, no houses, just endless rows of trees and mist hanging low over the ground. One of them opened the door and dragged her out. The cold air hit her face, and the rain soaked through her thin sweater instantly. They didn't rush. Every step they took was steady, purposeful, like people who knew this place well. Ahead, faint through the downpour, she could make out the outline of a small wooden cabin. The cabin stood crooked, its roof sagging under years of decay. A single metal door, streaked with rust, creaked open as they pushed her inside. The smell of damp wood and mold filled her nose. There was no furniture, only a cracked table, a few old chairs, and a fireplace full of ashes. One of them turned on a small camping lantern, casting an eerie orange glow across the room. The light revealed 4 faces, 2 men older than 30, one younger man with sharp eyes, and a woman with dark hair tied back tightly. They worked in silence, tying Megan to a post in the corner. One of them checked her bag, pulling out her phone, wallet, and car keys. Her phone was quickly turned off and thrown into the fire pit. The woman seemed to be taking notes, writing something down on a piece of paper while the others moved around the room with quiet efficiency. It was clear they had done this before. Hours passed. The storm outside grew worse, the wind howling through cracks in the wooden walls. Megan tried to stay awake, but exhaustion weighed on her. She kept thinking about the road, the headlights, the moment the engine failed, each detail looping through her mind like a broken film reel. She wondered if anyone would find her car, if anyone would even know she was missing. At one point, she noticed the woman placing a small camera on a shelf facing her. Its red light blinked faintly in the dark. It was recording. That's when Megan understood. This wasn't about money or revenge. They wanted to watch her, to study her. She tested the ropes on her wrists, tried to loosen them without drawing attention, but the younger man caught her movement. He didn't say anything. Instead, he smiled faintly, as if amused by her attempt, and then walked out into the rain. She could hear him talking to the others outside, his voice low but firm. The group returned hours later with supplies, cans of food, ropes, and what looked like medical instruments. They were organized, clinical. One adjusted the camera, another marked something on the wall. The woman began to hum softly as she cleaned the instruments. The sound echoed through the cabin, mingling with the storm. Megan realized then that this wasn't random. They hadn't picked her by chance. They'd been watching her, studying her routines, waiting for the right night. She felt her throat tighten as she understood the truth. The breakdown, the chase, the abduction, none of it was an accident. Outside, thunder rolled across the forest, shaking the fragile walls of the cabin. Somewhere deep in the woods, a branch snapped. The sound made all 4 captors glance toward the door. For the first time since her capture, Megan saw something flicker across their faces. Not control, not confidence, but unease. The rain did not stop for 2 days. It came down in endless sheets, soaking the forest and turning the dirt paths into rivers of mud. Inside the cabin, the air grew stale and heavy. Megan had barely eaten. Her wrists were raw, and her throat burned from thirst. The 4 captors moved less now, their earlier confidence fading into tense silence. Something had shifted among them. They no longer looked at her like an experiment. They looked at each other with suspicion. Late that night, the sound of thunder rolled through the forest, followed by a flash of white light that illuminated the cabin for a brief moment. Megan saw their faces in that flash, tired, anxious, and strangely fearful. One of the men, the youngest, named Tyler, cursed under his breath. He grabbed a flashlight and a tarp, muttering something about checking the generator. The others didn't try to stop him. He pulled on his coat and stepped into the storm, slamming the door behind him. Minutes passed, then an hour. The wind howled louder, but the sound of his footsteps never returned. The others waited, whispering to one another in nervous tones. Eventually, the man with the beard decided to go after him, but the woman stopped him with a hand on his arm. Her eyes were wide, her voice low. They all sat still, listening to the forest. Somewhere in the distance, something cracked, wood breaking, or maybe a body falling. Megan's heart pounded. Her ropes had loosened slightly, thanks to the dampness. Every time lightning flashed, she worked her wrists, grinding the rope against the edge of the wooden post. It tore at her skin, but she didn't stop. Then came a scream, short, sharp, and swallowed by the wind. The woman jumped, the older man swore, and all three of them rushed to the window. The forest outside was pitch black except for the quick flicker of lightning. Nothing moved. Hours later, Tyler's flashlight was found near the shed, its beams still glowing faintly in the mud. The men dragged his body back just before dawn. His face was pale, his eyes open but empty. His neck was twisted at an unnatural angle. No one spoke as they laid him down on the floor. The woman knelt beside him, shaking. She whispered that it must have been an accident, that he slipped in the rain. But Megan saw the bruises on his arms and the marks near his throat. They didn't look like the work of nature. The storm continued, but the cabin grew quieter. The camera's red light still blinked, capturing everything. The fear, the silence, the unraveling of their control. One by one, they started blaming each other. The younger man had been reckless. The older one hadn't checked the traps. The woman accused them of planning something behind her back. Their voices rose, their calm shattered. Megan sat still, her wrists now almost free. The timing had to be perfect. She waited until another thunderclap masked the sound of the rope snapping loose. Her hands were numb and bloodied, but she could move. Slowly, she slipped the rope off her wrists and crouched low. The older man's bag was beside the table. Inside it, she found a shard of glass, probably from a broken lantern. She wrapped it in her sleeve and hid it under her arm. When the group finally noticed her missing rope, it was too late. The door creaked open in the wind, and in that moment of distraction, she disappeared into the darkness outside. The forest swallowed her whole. They ran after her, shouting, but the rain drowned out their voices. Somewhere between the lightning and the trees, Megan circled back toward the shed, waiting for one of them to follow. Tyler had been the first to die. The next one, she decided, would not be by accident. The forest was a maze of shadows and noise. Rain dripped steadily from the branches, masking Megan's movements as she crept behind the trees near the cabin. Her body ached from exhaustion, but her mind was sharp now. Every sound, every flicker of light mattered. She had one advantage. They thought she was running blindly into the woods. But she hadn't run far. She had doubled back, watching as the remaining three argued outside the cabin, panic spreading through their once-organized ranks. The woman, Lexa, was shouting, her voice cracking with fear. She wanted to leave. The two men refused. They couldn't abandon their supplies or their tapes. They couldn't admit that they were losing control. Megan watched them from the darkness, her hands trembling around the shard of glass she still carried. Every drop of rain that touched her skin felt like ice. Her breath came in short bursts, but she stayed hidden, waiting for the moment when one of them would break away from the others. When the bearded man stormed off toward the shed, Megan followed him quietly, stepping in his footprints to mask her tracks. The storm had eased into a steady drizzle, and the forest smelled of wet soil and pine. The man was muttering to himself, cursing the others, kicking at puddles as he went. He reached the shed, pushed open the door, and bent to pick up a lantern. He never heard her move behind him. What happened next was over in seconds. A quick strike, a flash of pain, a body falling hard against the dirt floor. Megan didn't stay to look. She backed out of the shed and disappeared into the trees again, her heart hammering in her chest. The rain began to fall harder once more, washing away footprints and blood alike. She had done what she needed to survive, but the shock of it made her knees weak. She pressed a hand over her mouth to stop from crying out. Back at the cabin, the woman and the remaining man were shouting again. Their fear had turned to rage, each blaming the other for what was happening. They hadn't realized yet that Megan was not running from them anymore. She was hunting them. Hours passed like minutes. The darkness outside was complete, and the storm made sure no one could hear her scream. By dawn, the woman had fled. She took a small flashlight and disappeared into the trees, her sobs echoing faintly before fading away. Megan watched her go, hidden behind the broken wall of the cabin. She didn't follow. She didn't need to. The forest would take care of her. Later, search teams would find the woman's body at the edge of a ravine, her clothes torn, her skin pale from cold. There were no signs of struggle, only exhaustion, hunger, and fear. Inside the cabin, only one man remained. He was shaking, clutching a knife, pacing in circles as the storm finally cleared. The sun began to rise, cutting through the mist in thin golden beams. Megan stepped into that light for the first time since her abduction, her face streaked with dirt, her eyes steady and unflinching. The man froze when he saw her. There were no words, no screams, just a look of disbelief as realization dawned that the victim he had tried to control was no longer helpless. When the police finally arrived 2 days later, guided by a hiker who had stumbled across the abandoned SUV, they found the cabin silent. 3 bodies lay inside and 1 outside in the ravine. The only survivor was Megan Lewis, sitting near the doorway, covered in mud, holding a torn piece of rope. She was barely conscious but alive. The sheriff asked her what had happened, and she looked at him with calm, hollow eyes before whispering the only word she could manage. They thought it was 4 against 1. They were wrong. The aftermath in Pine Hollow lingered long after the rain stopped. The forest that had once echoed with the sound of thunder was now eerily quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. News of the incident spread fast, shaking the small community that had always believed their town was too ordinary for tragedy. Reporters flooded the area, helicopters hovered above the treetops, and yellow police tape wrapped around the decaying cabin like a warning sign. The place where Megan Lewis had fought for her life became a symbol of both horror and survival. Investigators worked for weeks, combing through every inch of the site. They found camera equipment hidden in the walls, hard drives buried under loose floorboards, and a notebook filled with disturbing notes. The pages detailed a twisted philosophy, something the group called the circle of endurance. They believed that by pushing victims to their psychological breaking point, they could uncover a deeper truth about human nature. But for all their talk of control and discipline, the group had collapsed under their own madness. The footage recovered from the cameras told a story the police could hardly stomach. It showed the first days of Megan's captivity, her fear, her confusion, and their calm precision. But as the recordings went on, the tone shifted. The captors began arguing, turning on each other, their voices cracking under stress. Then came the final hours, the sound of rain outside, the flash of lightning through broken windows, and screams that faded into silence. The cameras cut off just before dawn. Megan refused to watch the recordings. She didn't want to relive what she already remembered too well. After being treated at the hospital, she spent days answering questions she didn't want to hear. Every officer wanted to know how she survived, how she managed to turn the situation around. She gave them simple answers. She stayed calm. She waited, and she did what she had to do. What she didn't tell them was that something inside her had changed the moment the car broke down on that road. The fear that once froze her had turned into something sharper, something that refused to die. When the investigation finally ended, Megan left Pine Hollow without saying goodbye. She sold her apartment, deleted her social media, and vanished from the public eye. The media called her the survivor of the Pines. Documentaries, podcasts, and talk shows tried to reach her, but she never responded. Her silence became part of the legend. People debated what really happened that night. Some believed there was a 5th member of the group who had never been caught. Others whispered that Megan knew more than she ever admitted. Years later, hikers occasionally reported seeing small signs near the edge of the forest. A flower laid carefully on a stone, a strip of cloth tied to a tree, or faint footprints that disappeared into the mud. Locals said Megan came back once a year, always alone, always silent. The cabin still stands, though nature has begun to reclaim it. Ivy creeps along the walls, rain seeps through the roof, and the air smells of rot and forgotten things. The police no longer visit, but those who pass by claim they can still feel something in the air, an unease, a presence, like the memory of fear itself. Megan's story remains one of survival, but not the kind told in simple words. It is the story of a woman who faced 4 predators in the dark and discovered that sometimes survival isn't about escaping. It's about becoming something the darkness cannot break. And though the world may never know every truth buried in that forest, one thing is certain. In the endless reign of Pine Hollow, Megan Lewis didn't just survive. She endured.